Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brent Lakeman. I'm the Director for the Hydrogen Initiative at Edmonton Global. For context, Edmonton Global is the regional economic development organization for the Edmonton metropolitan region. Our focus is on attracting foreign investment, helping our regional businesses export with the world, and improving our region's global competitiveness. We see the hydrogen economy as a key sector that holds a lot of opportunity for our region, and we're looking forward to exploring this topic with all of you. Over the next hour and a half, our goal is to walk you through the current landscape in California as it relates to the hydrogen economy and to provide some information about the potential demand for Alberta hydrogen exports. But first, a couple of housekeeping details. You've all been muted and your videos have been disabled, but we strongly encourage you to submit questions for our panelists through the chat function of Zoom. We will be addressing these questions during the Q&A portion of the event, and if we aren't able to get to your questions today, we will be following up with responses to any questions that weren't addressed. We'll also be circulating a recording of the webinar, including the slides from our panelists, with everyone after this event. As some of you may be aware, this is the second of a series of webinars that are being organized by the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Hydrogen Hub. The first webinar was on the Japan hydrogen market, and that was hosted last week by Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association. Today, we'll learn about the approach being taken by California to advance its hydrogen economy, and we'll gain a better understanding of their economic and environmental priorities. California is known to be an early leader in energy and environmental issues. They've emerged as one of the key jurisdictions helping to shape future energy systems, and in particular, the path towards the hydrogen economy. We have an exciting panel of speakers from both the public and private sector in California who I'll be introducing in a moment. But before doing so, I would like to turn the floor over to Her Worship, Alana Natu, Mayor of Sturgeon County, and also the Chair of the Leadership Committee for the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Hydrogen Hub. Go ahead, Mayor Natu.
Thank you, Brent. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today to learn more about California's hydrogen landscape and their market needs for low-cost, low-carbon hydrogen. As mentioned, my name is Mayor Alana Natu, and I am Chair of the Alberta Industrial Heartland Association and Chair of the leadership team of the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub. Hydrogen may be the smallest molecule, but it has the potential to have a truly historical impact on the future of energy in our region, our province, and our country. Alberta's Industrial Heartland is among the world's lowest cost producers of low carbon hydrogen, and in fact can be produced at about half the cost of diesel. So with access to low-cost natural gas, existing experience in hydrogen production, and carbon capture and storage, as well as a vast network of pipeline infrastructure, a large talent pool of engineers and tradespeople, and engaged industry, government, Indigenous leaders, and academic leaders, the Edmonton region is well positioned to capture and maximize the hydrogen opportunity on every level. Hydrogen is redefining how we use our natural resources, and I am proud to say that my colleagues and I at the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub are working together to advance a shared goal of accelerating a strong pan-Canadian hydrogen economy and working towards a goal of making Canada a leading user and exporter of low-carbon hydrogen. And so how do we do that? Well, one way is through demand export markets. And so today's experts from California Governor's Office, the California Hydrogen Business Council, and the California Energy Commission will help us to understand where the potential lies and how Canada can take advantage of the tremendous export opportunity in hydrogen. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your insight on this critical topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Natu. Your leadership in this initiative for our region is certainly appreciated. Our first panelist is Gia Basine, who is the Assistant Deputy Director of Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development and part of the Business and Economic Development, the Go Biz team with the California Governor's Office. We did share the bios of our panelists with all of you who registered prior to today's event, but you can also access them on the event page of the Edmonton Global website. So now I'd like to turn the floor over to you, Gia.
Find my unmute button. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us here today. Let me share my screen and we'll get started here. Okay, great. How is that coming through? Good? Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of talking a little bit higher level about what's happening in California, some of the policies we have, how we're thinking about hydrogen here, and a little bit about where we think there are opportunities in the future, and then we'll have the chance to hear from other panelists in a little bit more detail. Just to start off, as mentioned, I'm part of the GoBiz team. It stands for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And GoBiz is intended to be kind of the one-stop shop for businesses looking to come to California or expand within California. And that would be, national and international. So we have a number of different units. I won't go through all these, but helping with incentives navigation, with identifying properties or real estate for businesses that want to come here. We help with permitting. We have an office just specifically for small businesses, our international affairs, which would be, contact here with our Canadian counterparts. And then of course the zero emission vehicle market development unit sits in GoBiz as well. And we focus a lot on state agency alignment and coordination, being kind of a bridge between the public sector and the private sector, and figuring out ways in which levers that we can pull that would really help to kind of unlock, market forces and those kinds of things. We help with getting permitting to get infrastructure in the ground, both on the charging side and the hydrogen side. I spend almost all of my time on the hydrogen side, and thinking about kind of proposed and existing regulatory navigation and those kinds of things. So a broad suite of things. And although we focus on transportation, I would say, especially in the hydrogen side, we're lucky that sort of, because of its opportunity as an energy carrier, it bleeds out into other areas as well, and more as the recognition of the opportunities for hydrogen continues to grow. So just in terms of, where California is, and some of our goals, we have legislation and executive orders that are really steering us towards zero emission transportation. So this has evolved over time. I think here you can see we have some aggressive climate goals, most notably, carbon neutrality for the state by 2045, as well as zero carbon electricity by 2045. Reducing the smog forming NOx significantly by 2030. And, it makes sense that we would then think about, how to execute this, that zero emission transportation would be a big piece of this, because of, it's nearly 50% of our GHG emissions, and, a massive portion of our NOx emissions. So there's a couple of targets here. I'd say just, we started back in 2012 with 1.5 million ZEV target by 2025. I think we're getting close to 1 million now. That was upped in 2018 to 5 million ZEVs on the road. And it also set our first infrastructure targets that were sort of formalized. So 250,000 chargers, as well as 200 hydrogen stations. And Jean's going to talk in more detail about how the Energy Commission has helped bring this into the ground. So I'll glaze over it for now. And then I just wanted to note here, we had an executive order in September of 2020 that really kind of set some very, aggressive goals. And I think for a state, certainly the first state in the United States to do something like this. So setting 3 goals, 100% of new sales of passenger vehicles will be zero, and trucks will be zero emission by 2035. And then looking at 100% zero emission for medium heavy duty vehicles by 2045, and actually 2035 for the drayage fleets. And then finally, for off-road vehicles and equipment, 2035 for 100% ZEV. So that was a big deal. And, that really, I think, highlighted and is in line with the urgency that we see to really decarbonize the transportation sector. I'll just mention I'll let you read through these, a few things here. We have, regulations by our Air Resources Board that are advancing zero emission fuels and transportation. So around transit, around clean trucks, passenger vehicles. It's been in place for a while in terms of purchasing credits, or, generating vehicles that offset GHG. The one that I'm going to pause on here is the low carbon fuel standard on the bottom. So, that sets the intensity for standards for fuel, and also allows those that are having lower intensity, lower carbon intensity fuels to be to generate credits and to sell these credits to those that are, utilizing higher carbon intensity models. And in I think it was January of 2019, this be extended to, and this is for fuels that are sold. So in the beginning of 2019, for those that are unaware, it expanded to hydrogen stations, as well as the DC fast charging stations, that they could generate credits up to their entire capacity. So not just on the fuel that's sold, but all the way to the capacity of the station. And what we understand this to be, it was kind of a policy tweak, which actually made it a tool that we were able to do pretty, I'm not going to say it's not simply, but it was a much easier pathway. And what we've heard is that this has really been a game changer in terms of unlocking private investment, and that in addition to the direct grants that are being received, that this has really opened up the opportunity to help aim us towards scale, to unlock economies of scale. And so that's been a very big deal for us in California. I just wanted to show this quickly. I won't go through it, but another way of thinking about the policy context, we basically support fuels, vehicles, and stations. There's a number of different ways in which that happens here, but just to show kind of the breadth of policies and support that we have in place. So we have focused mostly on fuels and stations in terms of grants, but you can see the capacity credits there. So let's see, moving on. So one of the things that as part of Governor Newsom's executive order in September, and thinking about what a large task it is to get to 100%, he actually tasked GoBiz with developing a ZEV market development strategy. So at the highest level, the strategy is pretty simple. It's around organizing stakeholders, both public and private, prioritizing where the focus and collective efforts should be, to implement key actions, and then measuring our progress and learning from our experience. And the strategy really just aims to articulate our core principles and identify our targets, kind of establish where different stakeholder groups fit and how they may be able to come in to help us accelerate and solve problems, and then to think about how to collectively problem solve, and increasing transparency certainly from the public sector side, but just kind of enhancing that collective problem solving, and then finally ensuring that lessons learned are kind of accessible, and that we are learning from our mistakes and capitalizing on our successes. And then finally, the ideal result is for agency leadership and staff and for stakeholders to be positioned to meet and even exceed our high expectations. So just to say a little bit more about that, the strategy is centered around these four kind of market pillars. So vehicles, infrastructure, end users, and the workforce. And really these pillars must be really fully supported. If one fails, the system is weakened or fails. And so that's how we're thinking about this. And then that's really built upon this foundation of 5 core principles, which you see here on the bottom. Equity in every decision. We're trying to think about equity through every lens and every decision. Embracing all zero emission pathways. So every technology, hydrogen and fuel cells, battery electric, if other technologies emerge, that as well. Collective problem solving, public actions driving private investment, and then designing the system for resilience and adaptability, right? Learn as we go and be able to be agile enough to be able to implement what we're learning. So there's a few pieces here. If anybody wants to dig in a little bit deeper on this, there's a few elements here. We have a public ZEV strategy website, and we can provide that to the participants, but it's on the GoBiz site. You can see here on the left the picture. And that will kind of be a repository for the different documents and the latest information and metrics tracking. We have the ZEV strategy document itself there, which provides the guiding principles and kind of objectives, and this will be updated at least every 3 years. And then in addition, we've just recently posted the annual state agency action plan. So this is where the agencies will look at the objectives that are in for their agency that are in the strategy document and really think about in this year, how are we going to focus that effort? And then they'll report out on that and have another plan the next year. And finally, we're working actively right now on the annual pillar priority action plans. So there'll be 2 documents here. One is an equity engagement strategy, really to think about how do we, again, think about equity through the lenses and how do we engage those communities and groups to ensure equity in our decisions. And then a multi-pillar action plan. So again, you know, taking our the pillars together and thinking about how do we move forward. Okay. So I just have a couple slides on thinking about, you know, we've been focused in that way so far, you know, on the transportation system, but as you all know, you know, we have a growing global awareness about, you know, hydrogen and its opportunities. And there's many countries that are incorporating this into their transition plans, energy transition plans. So looking at time here, how am I doing? Okay. So thinking about for us, you know, in California, there's a lot of different ways that we can go. We've been focused on transportation, as I've said a couple of times. I think that looking at some places where we're starting to spend more energy, of course, renewable hydrogen is very important. And in California, leveraging the load balancing capabilities of, we have a great overproduction of renewables in the middle of the day. How can we sort of balance out, you know, those kinds of things and utilize those renewable resources? Thinking about a lot more towards medium heavy duty and the applications there. And of course, I want to say capturing the synergies there with the light duty sector and how it can drive down costs between, you know, the volume of molecules from the heavy duty sector and the component development from the light duty sector. They help to drive costs down. And then thinking about energy storage and resilience. And, you know, especially we think about now in terms of wildfires, what is the opportunity to sort of think about how we can be more resilient, you know, through that lens as well. Also thinking about things like hydrogen in the pipeline, both, you know, blended or dedicated potentially. There's a project in Utah for the Intermountain Power Plant, which used to be a coal burning plant, and it's transitioning to using renewable resources to produce green hydrogen. And then it's going to be transported via an existing pipeline to the city of Los Angeles. And over time, they plan to ramp up to 100% hydrogen. So that's a pretty exciting project. I'll just mention here that, you know, there's things like the Energy Commission has a proposed research initiative around the role of green hydrogen in decarbonizing California and coming up with a roadmap and a strategic plan. And that would be looking at, you know, what we need for storage, where are the best applications, those kinds of things. So we're moving in that direction more and more. And so really, I just want to leave you with, I think what we're thinking about now is, you know, how do we best invest in the hydrogen system? We recognize, you know, this image, which I failed to say before on the left, is from the Department of Energy, and it's their H2 at scale, right? Looking at, you know, the opportunities across these various sectors. And so, you know, we understand that by investing in the system, we can help drive down costs and accelerate sort of our transition to clean energy. So I don't have the answer to this question, but we are thinking about it and are happy to have more dialogue with anybody, you know, who wants to. And with that, I'll just say thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gia, and definitely appreciate that comprehensive perspective on the California hydrogen strategy. Just a reminder for everyone, please feel free to enter any questions you have for our presenters in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A section of the event. So our next presenter is Jean Barnes, who leads the Hydrogen Refueling Infrastructure Unit within the Fuels and Transportation Division of the California Energy Commission. So Jean, over to you. You just unmute yourself, Jean.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Brent. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the investments on the part of California in hydrogen in transportation sectors. The Clean Transportation Program is the name of the program where I work, and we are located in Sacramento, California. The Clean Transportation Program was established in 2007 by California Assembly Bill 118 and extended through January 1st, 2024 by California Assembly Bill 8. California Assembly Bill 8 asked the Energy Commission to allocate at least $20 million per year for hydrogen refueling stations to establish a network of at least 100 public stations. At the CEC, we refer to competitive solicitations as GFOs. That stands for Grant Funding Opportunities. Our most recent GFO was numbered 19602. It was released in 2019, and it was for hydrogen refueling infrastructure in general. We awarded up to $115.7 million in grants, depending on future appropriations. Our initial batch of stations for 30 light-duty refueling stations was funded in the amount of nearly $25 million of Clean Transportation Program funding and $5 million from the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Fund. We still have up to 81 more stations to be funded under this GFO. And generally, these stations can be described as light duty, and some will fuel medium duty fleets and potentially heavy duty.
Right now, Brent.
Jean, we're just needing to get your screen shared. I think it hasn't come up yet. If you're able to press share screen.
Okay, sorry. I apologize.
Okay, I think we're good now.
All right, so here is the term GFO that I was talking about, grant funding opportunity. We are also funding medium and heavy duty infrastructure and vehicles. In the fiscal years 2020 and 2021, we funded $20 million in projects. And over the next 2.5 years, we will fund upwards of $115 million in vehicle and infrastructure projects. These range everywhere from drayage, medium duty fleets, block grants for infrastructure of all sizes, and also blueprints for planning the infrastructure rollout. As Gia mentioned, the California Energy Commission is embarking on what is called a research idea exchange. A scoping workshop was held last week, and this was in the area of how to establish a pilot system, what are the issues of hydrogen blending in the natural gas system of the state. At the CEC, we post public comments in what are called dockets, and docket number 19 ERDD01 is the docket being used for comments. On the 18th of March, we had people from the utility companies, the state government, the federal government, and also academicians talk about the issues of the existing pipeline infrastructure, how a dedicated pipeline could be built for hydrogen, how both could be used, and the issues of longevity and the blending ratios, et cetera. So at the moment, Dr. Yang of the CEC is collecting comments. If you are interested, you can join the public conversation. And here is Dr. Yang's email address. This slide gives an example of a slice of the hydrogen fueling just for transportation in California since we started our investment program in hydrogen. We started in 2015, and today we are looking around 3,000 kilograms a day. That's about enough fuel to fill 900 fuel cell electric vehicles every day and a few large-scale buses for transit. We do publish an annual report. It's called the Joint Agency Staff Report, and that is available on our website for 2020. You can see some dips, you can see some hills on this graph, and COVID-19 did have an impact on the throughput of our stations. In many cases, we were fueling 30% of our nameplate capacities. So you can see some dips in this chart because of COVID. This pie chart shows a percent of hydrogen dispensed in the various regions in 2020. Most of the hydrogen for transportation is dispensed in the greater Los Angeles area. And the second largest area for dispensing is the San Francisco Bay Area. We've also funded 2 renewable hydrogen facilities, some total 3,000 kilograms, 3 tons a day of renewable, 100% renewable hydrogen. This pie chart really represents upwards of a 40% of 100% renewable hydrogen being dispensed. And Gia mentioned the California Air Resources Board low carbon fuel standard, which does require 40% of hydrogen dispensed to be 100% renewable hydrogen. So if you think of this chart and you think in terms of 3 ton a day being dispensed, you can imagine that we have roughly 40% at a minimum renewable hydrogen. Many of our stations are purchasing biogas credits and are 100% renewable hydrogen. In fact, the majority of our 47 stations running today are running 100% renewable hydrogen. This chart shows a demand forecast with low, medium, and high scenarios. And the California Energy Commission Analysis Division that looks at data has put out this chart and numerous others. Anyone interested can obtain this data, can download this data and work with it. On average, we're looking at 4,000 ton a day demand forecast. These units here are kilograms, going up to 30,000 ton a day by 2030 forecast. This is my final slide. I just want to show you a few photos of our stations. I must say, during COVID-19, our developers continued to build and open stations. And I give a shout out to our developers for that extra work in this unusual year that we just ended. The upper left station is by First Element Fuel, and you'll see there 4 fueling positions capable of the highest 70 mph for lowest temperatures of T40. So what did I just say? So we have requirements for pressures, and we get those pressures when we fuel cars by very low temperatures. We also have requirements for purity of hydrogen to be dispensed into vehicles, and those are set by California regulations. Purity tests have to be completed every 6 months in order for a station to remain operational. The bottom left picture is a station by Iwatani Corporation of America. This is a 2 fueling position station, and that's located in Mountain View, California. Both of those stations are using liquid hydrogen, which is turned into gaseous fuel and dispensed as a gas. The Shell station in the center is a gaseous station, and the Class 8 truck at the bottom is only one example of the 13 trucks being filled daily at the Port of Long Beach. This is a renewable hydrogen system developed by Shell, Toyota, and others. And this works by direct injection of biogas into a pipeline to generate 100% renewable hydrogen. So I want to comment a little bit on, those are our stakeholder community. Our stakeholders span everywhere from the station developers, the industrial gas companies, the pipeline, the trucking companies, people who build the stations themselves, and then the drivers. There's a full range of different personalities and experiences in this system within the state. The hydrogen at scale graphic is the same one Gia put out, but I want to mention just in closing that there's about 10 million metric tons of hydrogen being produced in America today. Most of that is through steam, methane, reformation, natural gas base, approximately 95%. And the uses are oil refinery and ammonia production, and transportation is a tiny part of that pie. But our goal now is to integrate the need for transportation fuel with a larger energy system of hydrogen production in the state and in the nation, and frankly, in the world. California cannot do this alone. There are roughly 450 stations worldwide, like these photos you see here, and we have only 10% of those stations. Other nations, Germany, parts of Asia, all have double-digit numbers of stations, and we're really glad to be a part of the global use of hydrogen for transportation. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Jean, for that detailed presentation, particularly that focus on the transportation sector. Our final panelist, and I should just know we are getting lots of great questions coming in, so we're doing quite well. Our final panelist is Bill Zoelwell, who is the Executive Director of the California Hydrogen Business Council. That's a nonprofit trade association that advances the commercialization of hydrogen and fuel cells in California's energy and transportation sectors. We've heard from the government perspective, but now we're going to hear Bill provide the business perspective on the California energy market. Bill, over to you, and if you could please share your screen. Thank you. I think you might be on mute still, Bill, if you just unmute. Can you unmute, Bill?
Yeah, just got to find the button. Sorry about that. Came up with a presentation mode. So thanks for the opportunity. Everybody see the screen okay? And hear me all right? If so, then we'll just jump right into this. Okay. So again, I'm Bill Zoelwell.
Bill, sorry to interrupt, Bill. We're seeing the presentation mode screen, just so you're aware. Right? Yeah.
How do we, okay. Well, how do we go back to doing something else then? Let me try this. No different. Bear with me a moment. Let's try it. I'll try to reload it and see what happens. Hold on one second.
Whatever you did that second time looked good. There we go. That looks right to me. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, well, that's okay. Thanks for letting me know. Mm-hmm. So if this looks okay to everybody, then I'll just go ahead and proceed with this. Apologize for the hiccups here. So a little bit about us, California Hydrogen Business Council. This is who we are. We represent about 125 members in the hydrogen and fuel cell industries. Everybody from startups to some of the largest corporate brands in the world that are all involved in this energy space. Our membership is growing every day, and it's quite active, as everybody on this webinar certainly knows. A little bit about us. I won't spend a lot of time on this. You can certainly see these things on our website, but our vision is to advance the commercialization of this fuel here in California and beyond, and serve as an indispensable and leading voice for our members in the policy arenas. We do get involved in California in a variety of different venues, all of which are going to be important to the commercialization of this technology. From the transportation space, which you've heard quite a bit on from both Gia and Jean. We also cover the electric and gas markets, working on market design there to try to grow demand. And then at some of the highest levels in the state where they put together their decarbonization plans at the various regulatory agencies where the policy filters down. So my presentation will take a little bit different turn. I will wrap it up with transportation, but I wanted to start really by helping everyone on the call sort of see what California is trying to accomplish, right? What is it we're trying to achieve with all of our decarbonization goals? So this was what the footprint for carbon looked like in California back in 2018. You can see transportation is by far the dominant source of GHG emissions for the state, followed by industrial emissions. And then you've got the electric sector, both imports and in-state generation that make up a sizable share as well. And the commercial and residential sectors are overlapped with both industrial and some transportation. But it's a fairly large problem. If you look at the power sector, which is where I want to start, California set some goals for itself. And I'm going to point out a few things here that I think are important to put all of this in context. The first goal was to achieve renewable electricity targets for the IOUs, investor-owned and publicly owned utilities, at 33% by 2020. The next milestone that we have to achieve is a 60% goal of renewable electric sales in the state by 2030. Now, some would say the first 30%, 40% is fairly easy. Sun shines about 30 to 40% of the day. Wind blows about that percentage. That next 20% is going to be a lot more difficult. And that last 5% of the 60% is going to be exceptionally difficult. So this is where the challenges come in. And these are some of the things that the state is looking to the business community for to help bring solutions forward to help solve these problems. And the end point for the state, of course, is by 2045, we want to be 100% decarbonized in the power sector in terms of what we sell to customers. Now, you notice the red arrow down there at the bottom. And the reason I put that there was to point out that in the power sector, unlike in the transportation sector, we don't grade our power supply numerically. In other words, it's not objective. For example, Gene and Gia both touched on the low carbon fuel standard and how there are objective measures for the various renewable content of that fuel, ranging anywhere from what could be 100 down to 0, and there are even some negative numbers. In the power sector, solar is in. It doesn't have a number, it's just in. Wind is in. Geothermal energy is included as a renewable resource. None of these things have an actual objective number, they're just in by categorization. I think what we will see over time is we'll see an increased emphasis on a more objective standard for the power sector, but that's further out. But I want folks to understand that the two markets are very different. One is you're included just by association, and the other is you're included based on what your objective carbon value is on one fuel versus another. So if we're looking at the addressable market, I should say, for the power sector, this is a chart that goes back to 2001 that shows the mix of the state's power resources and how they were brought in. And you can see the lion's share here is natural gas. Large hydro is a large portion of the state's resource requirement. That's the light blue area just on top of natural gas. But as you'll recall from the last chart, large hydro doesn't qualify as a renewable resource. So at this point, if nothing changes, we'll have to replace that resource along with natural gas with something else to help achieve our 60% and 100% renewable energy goals for delivered retail electricity. So as you can tell by looking at this, there are very few categories here that are actually included in that renewable power definition that qualify to meet those goals. So we're going to have to find new sources like hydrogen to fill those gaps. So when the state starts looking at opportunities for hydrogen, this is an excerpt from a report that was pulled together by the joint agencies led by the Energy Commission. And I've highlighted one section here that shows what I think is a tremendous opportunity for the delivery of renewable power into the state. And Gia actually had this as the last slide in her presentation, which was a plant that's going to convert its coal-fired power generation system over to what will be a blend of hydrogen and natural gas, and eventually a gas turbine that's 100% fueled by green hydrogen that will supply power into the state of California. So these are opportunities for firm zero carbon resources that are going to be required to meet what is a variable California demand going forward. So let's talk for a minute about the gas sector, right? We've covered the power sector. Let's talk about the gas sector. So if you look at the gas mix for the state in 2018, you can see it's largely dominated by natural gas. There's some refinery gas in there and a bit of biomethane. The biomethane percentage I would expect between 2018 and today has increased sizably, but natural gas still dominates the gaseous fuel mix for the state. Now, if we're going to achieve our 2045 goals of 100% decarbonization and provide power from the gas system to these renewable generators, we're going to have to find ways to decarbonize the gas grid. Jean touched on a project that the Energy Commission has just now undertaken that's looking at mixing renewable hydrogen into the gas grid and all of the various things that the gas utility need to look at, from the point of injection into the transmission system, all the way through compression, right down to the burner tip in someone's home and everything in between. Very big project, and I'm glad that the Energy Commission has gotten that started. If you take a look at the left side of this chart, what you see here is the expected percentage hydrogen will play in the gaseous fuels market in California by 2045. And you can see there's a very large share of hydrogen that's expected to be part of this fuel mix as we go forward into the 2045 timeframe. So let's talk for a second about heavy industry. This is a excerpt from a slide from another Energy Commission activity. Our coalition's actually involved in this activity, and it's designed to look at opportunities within the heavy industry sector. These industry sectors will also have to convert over to zero carbon technologies. And you'll notice there are 10 of them here that are listed as significant contributors. And the ones the Energy Commission is focused on, I've highlighted here with red arrows. So they're not focused on refineries, they're not focused on generation. Those are being taken care of in other activities. But cement, hydrogen plant, hydrogen production, the food processing industries, and mining are all areas that hold potential for hydrogen to replace existing carbonaceous fuels and help the state achieve its goals. So, and you can see there, they've given an estimate of the quantitative potential for the number of metric tons of hydrogen that will be needed to replace what's currently being consumed in those energy intensive industries. Okay, real quick, a couple of these things have already been covered by our previous presenters. So we've got the transportation targets on the bottom, and you've got the economy-wide targets on the top. I've touched a little bit on the SB 100 goals, which are the 60% of retail electricity sales. One of the things I'll mention before I jump into the transportation sector is there were a lot of projections that have been pulled together by various agencies in the state to show what the market was going to look like with an increasing number of zero emission vehicles going forward. When the governor announced his executive order late last year, all those projections went right out the window. The state's going to have to step back now, I think, and take a much closer look at the impact the governor's executive order is going to have on the marketplace. So there are a whole series of new reports and studies that are starting to be undertaken that will reevaluate this market under a new construct that actually puts a line in the sand that says, by this date certain, we have to have 100% light duty sales of zero emission vehicles. Internal combustion engines will be banned in the state from this point forward. 100% of drayage trucks that you can see there in the 2035 timeframe, which Gia touched on as well. And then off-road vehicles wherever feasible by 2035, with an aggressive goal for medium and heavy duty trucks by 2045. These are daunting goals, and they will certainly change the product mix that OEMs are putting into the market and the way in which fuel suppliers and those that want to get involved in the California transportation market are going to look at transportation fuels going forward. A quick look at the light duty market. By the numbers you can see, and I just updated this a couple days ago. So there's 9,200 light duty fuel cell electric cars right now running in California as of the end of February. If you talk to the OEMs, their expectations is that number can climb to almost 50,000 by 2026. Today we've got 45 hydrogen stations in the network. About 13 of those we will go up to about 172. Jean touched on the funding levels that are coming in a couple of different tranches over the next few years. And of those 172, 13 of those will be heavy duty capable, which is great. So how does this look compared to electric vehicles, right? Are we seeing the same kind of growth that we saw in the EV market several years ago? The Air Resources Board did a study on that. They took a look at the product uptake of battery electric vehicles back in the early part of the last decade. And you can see that series of data points going from left to right on the table, on the chart there. And then if you look at the blue dots further to the right, you can see those are the uptick of fuel cell electric vehicles into the marketplace. And what we're seeing is a similar uptake at this very early stage in the market. I think what we'll see is in 2020, 2020 was a tough year for everybody. COVID put put a damper on a lot of different things. But I think what you'll see in the 21 and the 22 timeframe, in particular, as a result of the governor's executive order and the increased focus on fuel cell electric vehicle infrastructure from the Energy Commission, you'll see a real uptick in light duty fuel cell electric car sales in the state. Some good news coming out of the state is that actually the cost of the newer stations and the capacity of these newer stations are both headed in the right direction. This chart does a good job of showing that from the original GFO that the Energy Commission issued, those costs between the original GFO and the current GFO have come down considerably, and the capacity of these stations have also gone up considerably over that same time frame. So this trend is certainly headed in the right direction. We're seeing lower costs and higher capacity for consumers. And I'll characterize it one more time. Again, these are projections that were made back in 2018 for where the market is headed. I would say all these projections are now, they may be somewhat accurate, but I would expect everything to be much more aggressive than projections that have come out up to this point based on the executive order. So just keep that in the back of your mind. This particular chart shows the projected pricing for hydrogen at the pump. Currently, prices for hydrogen at the pump are pretty high, but consumers are shielded from those prices because the OEMs provide a credit at the pump for a certain number of gallons per year. But that price, as you can see, is expected to decline very rapidly over time. And I think as we continue to make enhancements to the low carbon fuel standard and provide additional incentives for the fuel to come into the market, you'll see that price and total cost of ownership come down even faster for consumers. This is what you might consider an addressable market projection based on the same report. And what it shows is 3 different cases on how many million gallons of gasoline gallon equivalent. So this is not in kilograms, this is in GGEs. So different units than the chart that Gene shared earlier. But as you can see, this rate of growth between 2023, 2025, and 2030 is pretty rapid and gets up to very, very high levels by the 2030 timeframe. And as I mentioned before, I think that these projections are conservative based on the governor's executive order and where we see OEMs headed following that. So for those that are unfamiliar with the low carbon fuel standard, graphically it looks like this, where the state started at a certain point back up here, which you can see is to the left, and they set a trajectory for themselves between 2011 and then in 2000, and I believe it was 17 or 18, they extended the program out to 2030. So a couple of things happening here. The program is a market-based program that has buyers and sellers, where the buyers of these credits are the refineries, the petroleum refineries that put products, gasoline and diesel, into the market. And the carbon intensity of those products are higher than the standard, which means the refineries are deficit generators and need to buy credits. Folks like that distribute hydrogen renewable hydrogen into the marketplace, for example, or hydrogen or renewable natural gas, produce fuels that have a lower CI than that curve you see there, and they are credit generators. The credit generators will then sell their credits to the deficit generators in an open market that looks something like this. So if you look at the trend over the last several years, you can see the volume of credits traded is fairly high. So this is a very active market. It's a very stable market. And with a 10-year horizon, right, that you can see here, this gives investors some certainty that this program is going to be around. That's a good thing. You can also see that since 2019, prices for credits have been fairly steady, around $200 per metric ton of carbon, which is pretty good. That's a nice price for investors. And while I didn't include the slide here, there's a tremendous amount of money that has been invested in this market to help contribute lower carbon fuels to the California market based on this program. It has been wildly successful and I think exceeded everybody's expectations. In terms of where hydrogen stacks up on a carbon intensity score relative to other fuels, this is an EER adjusted pathway comparison. And by EER, that's the energy economy ratio of the vehicle. So an electric vehicle and a fuel cell electric vehicle have much better energy economy ratios than a gasoline vehicle, if you will. So they get a better score. And I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but you can see here on a relative basis where hydrogen stacks up against some of the other fuels that it has to compete against in the market. And if you use that vertical line there, that's 100 as a standard, that's about where the state standard is today, and it's declining a little bit each year. But originally when it started, it was right around 100. So being south of that, the further to the left you are of the 100, the more valuable your credit is as it's sold into the market. And I'll stop there. Make some time for questions. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Bill. We've had quite a few questions coming in from the chat, and as a reminder, we are going to do our best to get to all of them, but we will be following up with any questions that we aren't able to get to, and we'll be doing some grouping of questions. We've had, as you can expect, quite a large number, particularly around the topic of blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. So maybe we'll start with that one. So again, we've heard a lot about green, blue, gray hydrogen. Renee had a question. It was a bit late coming in, but I think it really kind of defines the question quite well. In Canada, we talk about the carbon intensity of hydrogen, that being preferred, low carbon intensity. Do you only define green hydrogen as renewable in California? And what about sequestration or carbon capture? So I think that was somewhat addressed, Bill, but I'm wondering if we can maybe have Gia, and then Bill, if you'd like to follow up with that as well. And I think, Jean, you perhaps have some perspectives on it. It's just to kind of really open up that question around the colors of hydrogen and that shift and the desire we have within Canada to focus more on low carbon intensity.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think, yes, the whole rainbow of colors. I think here in California, we tend to think about, as you mentioned, sort of carbon intensity. I think it does matter. The conversations, there are questions around sort of which is better, but in terms of the, whether green or would blue be acceptable and those kinds of things, and those discussions are ongoing. So in terms of like an official stance from the state, and Jean may be able to add some additional color, no pun intended, that an official stance, we don't have an official stance at this point. Right now, I think, the main thing is that we know that we need more hydrogen. We know that we're going to run into supply shortages if we don't plan for it now, and that we need more production. I think there's great opportunity for, from renewable sources, and really it's around getting more into the system and thinking about how can we ultimately get to, low carbon or zero carbon, which we're going to need to. But we don't tend to focus on the colors here either, more in terms of carbon intensity and how do we get more hydrogen into the system, and how do we green the hydrogen. Sorry to use the color. How do we reduce the carbon intensity of that hydrogen that we're using over time? So yeah, I'm sure Jean has something to add, and Bill too.
I'll just be picking up on Gia here. So I mentioned we have a % renewable hydrogen requirement, and that's our focus. So the CI provides a way for a company, a credit generating company on Bill's slide to the left of his vertical line, to have further to the left and more credit worthy. So we require in our dispensing for transportation, we presently require that at least 40% of the hydrogen dispensed is renewable hydrogen. So what's renewable hydrogen? So renewable hydrogen is defined in regulations, and it's talks in terms of carbon intensity. It includes a systematic approach, so CCS is included, but it does not explain it in terms of brown, gray, or blue or green.
I think I'd characterize it this way. We've got a long way to go in California to get ourselves on a level playing field across markets, right? In my presentation, I tried to point out up front that, the energy sector has got really 4 buckets. And if you fit into one of those 4 buckets, you're good, but there's no CI score, no carbon intensity score around those buckets. As Jean points out, there's a hydrogen market that has a requirement, if you use state funds, to be renewable. That's not a CI number. It's just, hey, as long as you're using renewable fuel in the production of this, you're in. So it's either you're in or out. The low carbon fuel standard, by contrast, the Air Resources Board puts a lot of effort into determining the specific carbon intensity of each individual fuel that's being put into that transportation market. And they've come up with this objective scale that shows, and you saw the chart that I put up, that shows sort of where all these various fuels fit on the scale. I suspect what will happen over time is all of the markets in California will gravitate to something of that nature. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. There's some legislative activity going on in the California State Legislature, trying to define what green hydrogen is. They're trying to make that definition as broad as possible instead of trying to make it as exclusive as it could be. And there's also some activity in the regulatory bodies trying to do the same kind of thing. So in my opinion, I think we don't want to make change too fast in these various markets, because people that have made investments up to this point have made them based on the current regulatory construct. So if we're going to make changes, we need to make them thoughtfully. We need to be careful. But to answer the questions about blue hydrogen and other carriers that might be bringing these various fuels into the state, my advice would be the state will accept anything. And if you have the ability to show that it's a low carbon product and it can contribute to the state's goals, they will find a way to bring it into the state. And eventually the state will move over to something that's more objective, that will give investors something to shoot for.
Great. Thank you, Bill, Jean, and Gia on that. I think that's a really important topic for us, and particularly, in Alberta, where we do produce so much hydrogen, and now so much of it is, also using carbon capture and storage technologies. So kind of great to hear, that's, deemed well within the current definitions that you've all highlighted. I'm going to turn to another topic, and we didn't really cover too much of this in the presentation, so it'll be a little bit different, but more about the infrastructure for movement of hydrogen. So for a question we had from Cole, there's an extensive pipeline network that currently connects Alberta's natural gas to California markets via Idaho, Washington State, Oregon, and Nevada. So in terms of Western US market cohesion, what collaboration with Pacific and Northwestern states might be necessary to regionally retool to maximize reposition existing infrastructure? So that whole question about some of that natural gas infrastructure in place to facilitate the shift to hydrogen, and where we see those conversations going. So it's probably a bit of a conversation for government. I'm not sure, Gia, if that's best for you, and perhaps again, the business perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great question. In terms of the pipeline network, your question was around what sort of discussions or sort of regional alignment we need to have. Certainly some. I think that what we're seeing now so far is attention by some of our gas utility companies who are really looking into hydrogen now and looking at the opportunity for what it would mean to have in the pipeline. I think that that it's wonderful to hear that there's a network, because I personally think that as we go forward, if we decide that hydrogen is going to be part of the backbone of this energy transition, which I certainly hope it is, I think it would be a misstep not to do that personally, not speaking from the governor's office in that statement, but I think we're going to need to think about pipelines for costs, for reducing the opportunity for some of the shortages that happen, or if there's disruptions in supply, lots of different reasons. So I think that we will need to have regional discussions, and I'm encouraged to see some of our major gas utility companies coming in with big investments and looking at how they may be able to increase the blend. And there's opportunity beyond transportation for that too, right? Greening other processes as well. So I think I sort of touched the side of your question there, Brent, but that's how we're seeing it now. And I suspect Bill has an opinion on this one too.
I do. We as an organization are very excited to see, the gas utility stepping up. SoCal Gas made a big announcement this last week. For those that missed it in the news, they are on a path to totally decarbonize their gas system by 2045, which is a tremendous announcement by North America's largest gas utility. So they want to position themselves, I should say, to set the pace for decarbonizing the gas grid. I would say this, and I think we all understand this, especially the folks that are in Canada and Alberta in particular, it's an energy province, is that, having a diverse energy portfolio is going to be important. We in California, as much as anybody, have realized especially over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, the importance of an energy resilient system. And putting all your eggs in one basket, like electrification, is probably a mistake. And we should continue to try to utilize the gas system assets as best we can and make the most of those in this transition to a zero carbon economy going forward. So utilizing a decarbonized gas system, finding ways to decarbonize that system. And there are lots of available technologies out there to do that. But doing it safely, doing it cost effectively, and doing it in a manner that gives, the investment community and folks that are willing to deploy capital certainty on their returns and sort of a long-term runway on regulatory programs to move in that direction will be most important. The programs that Jean's organization has started at the Energy Commission have already begun that work to see, where can we do this? What will it take to do this? There's a lot of literature out there, I think, that they're drawing on currently through university work to get that process started. And we'll start some pilot programs here in California shortly, we hope, to start looking at that from a more California-focused perspective, and starts hopefully setting some standards for gas injection into the pipeline over the longer term.
Thank you, Bill. I'm not sure, Jean, if anything further to add from CEC. I know I did participate, I think a week ago, in an interesting workshop on some of the blending research and demonstration projects being done. And there's some of that work going on, of course, in the Edmonton metropolitan region as well. So potentially some opportunities for sharing some of our learnings and knowledge.
Yeah. Please don't be shy, and you should participate, Brent, in the ongoing dialogue at the CEC on the online docket. Ask questions on the docket. Put answers out on the docket. Be a part of it's like a blog. It's like a blog, but it's a blog of documents, basically. So like Bill and Gia both said, the blending, the standards. I want to just add the safety. All of this is going to be looked at. Also the materials and the life expectancy of the existing pipelines, and how to best maintain the longer life expectancy to be able to handle hydrogen as a transition. So the dialogue started on March 21 this year. I will tell you officially on a docket, but people inside the agency talk about it constantly. I will tell you in that meeting, I don't know if you remember this, Brent, but some of the utility representatives said, can't you accelerate this? Can't you get your solicitation out? I think they have between $3 and $7 million in a purse, I understand, to fund research in the area of blending and transitioning a pipeline to hydrogen. So the people in the audience just said, can you do it faster? So the tenor was, you're almost too late now, so please accelerate. So it's a very exciting opportunity. Anyone who needs any information on interfacing with the CEC, figuring out what dockets, figuring out what emails, figuring out the experts' names, please send me a note. I'll be glad to hook you up so you can get going on your own.
Great. Thanks, Jean. Another question, a little more to the details now around some economics, I suppose, around the shift to hydrogen. So one question we had from Sanjay, what's the price point of retail hydrogen per kilogram at which we think it will be able to compete with gasoline, diesel, and with the electric charge systems? I'm not sure. Maybe Jean, you're pretty close to the transportation side, if you have some perspectives there.
Oh yes, I do. Just building on Bill's presentation, he mentioned EER. You remember that? He said that hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are 2.5 times more efficient than a gasoline internal combustion engine. So if you take an assumption that a full fuel cell electric vehicle can get 380 miles in a full tank, then you can reach parity with gasoline if hydrogen is sold between $7 and $9 a kilogram, assuming that you're comparing it to $3.50 a gallon gasoline to $4 a gallon gasoline. So right now, the average retail price per kilogram in the transportation sector ranges between $13.50 a kilogram to $16 a kilogram. So we're still a little bit high. We're still a little bit higher than that $9 a kilogram price to get parity with gasoline with an internal combustion engine. But as Bill mentioned also, the OEMs do provide $15,000 worth of free fuel with a car. So the driver has an incentive to continue to purchase the $13 and $13.50 to $16 kilogram hydrogen with that card. And so you say to yourself, well, how is that realistic? How does a driver see something like that as possible and as workable? Drivers I talk to say that amount of money for a fuel incentive is absolutely wonderful. And after they keep their cars for 3 years and they go on year 4, and even if they start paying at that time $8 a kilogram, they still save money on the fuel. So I know we do have a pipeline station. It's a dedicated pipeline station that goes from Wilmington, Carson to Torrance, California. It's about 8 miles long. The pipeline station is offering hydrogen happy hour. And so they're allowing drivers to fill up during happy hours in the LA area, in the Los Angeles area, and the hydrogen is reduced by $2 a kilogram during a 3-hour period. Why are they doing this? They're doing this to determine the price elasticity of hydrogen with the driver, with the community. So again, it's got to come down to about $7 to $9 a kilogram in order to reach parity with the gasoline ICE. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jean. I'm not sure, Bill, anything further to that? I think we've covered that quite well with Jean's response.
Yeah, no, I have a great response, Gene. Thank you. The only thing I would add there is that it's entirely dependent on the scale of the market. You take a look at the retail stations that are out there now, and they're not moving a lot of fuel, really. The whole market moves a couple tons a day. When we start getting scale in the marketplace and we start seeing some large scale utility grade projects that add and bring volume into the state, and you see more production, you'll see that production cost decline reflected in the cost at the pump as well. And the nice thing about hydrogen, as everybody on this call knows, is that it's economy-wide, right? It affects the gas sector, it affects the power sector, it can impact the transportation sector. And the more places you apply it, and the more scale you have in a particular economy like California, the faster the prices will come down. So that's what my organization is focused on, is trying to get some scale quickly. Great.
No, that's an important point, scaling up the hydrogen systems. We had our session last week on Japan, and we heard a little bit about ammonia during that session. I think there's some questions we have that are sort of in that space around ammonia as an energy or hydrogen carrier. So perhaps thoughts from the whole panel on converting hydrogen to ammonia for easier transport and storage. And what's the California perspective, both government and maybe where we're seeing some industry activities and industry interest as well, as far as, again, moving the hydrogen from other sources such as Canada.
I could start that. The short answer there is I think the commercial market will decide what form the hydrogen takes when it's transported, right? Whether it's in a dedicated pipeline, whether it's as ammonia, whether it's as DME, whether it's liquid or gas. That's going to be determined by the commercial characteristics of whatever the deal is. So important to know. I think that California is looking for low cost, low carbon sources of energy to supply its economy between now and short-term goals 2025, 2030, then 2045. How we ramp that up, how we develop scale for those low carbon sources, how they're delivered and distributed is what we're leaving to the commercial markets to decide and find the best way to do that.
Anything further, Gia or Jean, from government's perspectives on ammonia as the energy, or I keep saying energy, hydrogen carrier?
So I can build on Bill's comment. I think the question is one of gaseous or liquid, and then from there you decide which one. So the state is agnostic for the transportation application on that. I will say safety is very important from the federal sector, and that the requirements of being able to have a truck full of gaseous or liquid hydrogen, ammonia, any carrier, DME, any carrier, really has to meet federal regulations for the tank durability, the weight of the truck, and the wear and tear on the freeways.
Great, thank you. I know we have a number of questions sort of also in the methanol space as well, which I think the answer is pretty much the same as my impression, unless there's some further comments around that. We have one question really on the electricity side from Michael. Has there been any interest in promoting hydrogen-based energy sources for powering microgrids for neighborhoods and or smaller communities? Again, we've heard about the transportation side, but how about on the residential electricity use side? Not sure, Gia, is that one that falls within your space?
Jean, you might have a little bit more insight. I mean, I broader, but it looks like you took yourself off mute. Is there something happening at CEC there?
Well, yeah, just a point. We do have a jail in Alameda County that is off the electricity grid, and it's being run by stationary fuel cell operated by natural gas. And this was installed and is very successful and is quite a feat, because as you can imagine, security and access and all off the grid, a standalone microgrid must be very, very reliable. And that's been demonstrated now. I'm pretty sure it's up to 6 years. So we have a great demonstration there. There's, who's to say, I mean, it's simplistic to replace that fuel cell, that stationary fuel cell with hydrogen. So there's examples already of a more of a commercial level application there, and there's nothing to hold back hydrogen microgrids for homes. And imagine being able to make your own hydrogen in your garage and run your fuel cell car in addition to running your home. So these are scenarios that are absolutely on everyone's mind right now.
I'll touch on commercial microgrids for a minute. That's an area that we're particularly active in at the moment, and for all the right reasons. As everybody knows, the electric grid is undergoing more and more stress and strain as we go forward. More things are being electrified, electric vehicles, just electrification is taking place everywhere. And the capacity of the grid is getting strained. So what the electric utilities are looking at to ease that burden is distributed energy resources throughout the system. And those can take the form of microgrids. So what you will see, I think, here in very short order, if you haven't already started to see it, is that the utilities look more and more towards microgrids as a solution to some of their distribution and infrastructure problems where they have congestion and reliability issues. Now, the market design around those microgrids are different depending on where you are, and can be quite complex. But where you've got a commercial hub or where you've got an industrial application where you can apply a microgrid to take some of the load off of the utility system, the local air districts that are impacted by poor air quality are looking to move away from diesel and natural gas type microgrids and towards these zero emission microgrids, which is a battery for 2 hours, but after that, it's got to be something with much more durability and long-term duration, which gets right into fuel cells and the ability of hydrogen to be a long-term energy carrier, a long-term source of energy for the electric grid. So I think you're going to see more and more hydrogen-based microgrids that can provide long-term energy storage and distributed energy resources to the utility system. And at a bigger scale, I think you will see the utilities start looking more and more at long-term hydrogen energy storage as a way to meet their 60 and 100% energy delivery goals over the long term.
Thanks, Bill, and panel. There was one question, I think, for Gia on the equity engagement strategy. You mentioned that during your presentation. I think it was a question just about finding more information on that strategy, if you're able to provide that for us.
Yeah, the best way to do that would be to kind of sign up to be, we would call it affectionately, the roll up your sleeves group. So it's a group that wants to have more information on a regular basis about what's happening with the strategy. So I can put a link in the chat there. And I think that would be a way, as we're just kicking this off, initially it's about more information gathering, reaching out to, community groups that we know, but certainly we welcome that. So I think that that'd probably be the best way at this point to get engaged.
Thank you. I think we've had some questions again about the transport, the movement of hydrogen. So I'm going to start with one on the fueling stations themselves. and thoughts on what transportation method is being used currently or in the future to supply hydrogen to the fueling stations. And then we'll get into perhaps some of the longer distance transportation questions as well. So maybe first that would be for Jean on the supply to the refueling stations.
So we have mostly what I would call a hub and spoke approach. And that's really referring to a bicycle tire. So in the center, there's a centralized production facility that then siphons off truckloads of the fuel. And the station operators have had success in estimating their usage rate, and then they purchase ahead of time and the truck rolls in ahead of time before the station is low. We have had supply disruptions with the bicycle tire approach. I mentioned COVID as having an impact on the refueling nameplate versus the actual refueling, which Bill also referred to. We're up to about 3 tons a day, but we had a supply disruption in December of 2020 based on the tremendous weather issues in Texas, where trailers were bringing hydrogen produced on the Gulf Coast to California. So as we've progressed, I showed a chart starting in 2015 to 2020, 5 years. As we've progressed to a combination of out-of-state sources with trailers and being towed by trucks to a Southern California facility that is the centralized approach of SMR units producing hydrogen around 4 ton a day. We have a facility around 2 ton a day for liquid fuel in the Southern California area. We have transfill as interim steps where the centrally produced hydrogen is trucked to a transfill, transferred to smaller trailers and trucks, and then transferred to, driven to the station. So we've had stations that are small compared to today's stations, which are averaging what we call our 1616s. Those are 1,616 kilogram a day nameplate capacity. We started our program with 100 kilogram nameplate capacity stations. And as Bill pointed out, the costs have gone down, the capacities have gone up. It's a good news. But we still have many stations operating that are maxing out at 180 kilograms a day. Some of these are in very populous places like Anaheim, Santa Monica, and Irvine. They have 2 trailers loading those storage tanks daily. So there's a constant stream. There's a constant stream of trailers arriving today at almost 47 stations and filling in anticipation of the demand. So we've identified, if you're familiar with the Chevron profile, it's a standard from around the early 1980s, still being used by the gasoline industry, and we've juxtaposed that to the hydrogen industry. We're finding that the demand for hydrogen is following the Chevron profile. It's called what happens on Friday during rush hour. And actually the bell curves are nearly identical to having higher demand in the center of the bell curve, and then it comes off on the tails in the early morning and in the late evening. So we use those curves, operators use those curves to evaluate when the next truck fill is needed. The truck leaves the plant in time and fills the station. That's basically how it's operating today.
Yeah, Jean.
Great, thanks, Jean. And we've probably got about 10 minutes left, so we're just hoping maybe we can get a few quick responses on our number of questions we still hope to get to. So just kind of following up on that transportation line. And again, maybe a quick response on how we think California ultimately wants to receive imported hydrogen. I know we've heard a bit about the Texas example, I guess hypothetically around moving from other countries like Canada. Lots of focus here on ports, transportation by ports, and of course by pipelines. I know we've heard a bit about being agnostic on certain elements. I wonder if there's any quick thoughts on how hydrogen would be received, where are those key points of accepting the hydrogen. Bill, would you like to comment?
Sure. I guess the way I see things going forward is at the outset, it's going to be a mix in these interstate and international pipelines that we have that move from country to country and state to state. So you'll see an increasing blend of hydrogen in those pipes as we go forward to try to decarbonize the systems across the West. In terms of direct delivery, ultimately, there's going to be a project or projects that are big enough to run a dedicated pipeline from point A to point B and deliver that product into the state of California. California certainly has the demand, and as the demand for low carbon fuels and hydrogen becomes a part of that, I think you'll see bigger and bigger projects come into play. And at some point, you will find there will be an economic justification for a pipeline, which will get this whole thing started. That's how we move petroleum products today. And Gene already hit on it. I mean, this market is going to deploy, in my mind, much like the petroleum market did 100 years ago, where you're going to have hub and spoke models. You're going to have, last mile distribution by truck, but the bulk of the material is going to move from the production point to a transload facility or to an intermediate storage facility and then out to market from there.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Question again, we have lots of producers, hydrogen producers on the line here today, and really, I guess a quick answer. Many of them would like to get involved in the California hydrogen market, and any immediate thoughts on how to get involved in these projects. Who would be best to approach? Is that Gia going through the GoBiz team, and that's a bit of that pathfinding process you can provide, or is there other organizations that our producers should be connecting with, both government and I guess also from the private sector?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, certainly from the government perspective, come to GoBiz, we can help. We, beyond my expertise and team, we can help kind of think through how to enter the market here. I would also say, not speaking for Bill, but those kinds of organizations that are working towards expanding, the hydrogen economy here in California as well. But certainly, you're welcome to reach out anytime, and we'll connect you with all the resources we have at GoBiz.
We just building on Gia's point, if I may, Brent. So we offer whoever asks for it lists, coordinates of all the station operators, and they're easy to contact by phone or email. Thank you.
Okay. There was one question that came in. It was really, Bill, regarding one of your final slides on your presentation. And it was around the carbon intensity for electricity that you presented, and it really did show a very wide range of intensities. And is the right end of the range the fossil fuel-driven generation? And do you have a way of showing how big that pathway is for each source? So I guess a little more detail on the graphic you did put up on the carbon intensity for generation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've got another chart that I could have used that shows what the electric grid in California looks like today. So the average CI score for the grid today is about 84, okay, on the CI scale, if you will. So diesel's about 100, compressed natural gas comes in about 75, hydrogen comes in around 45 as a gas and about 75 as a liquid. So electricity is kind of right in there. And then you get into this EER factor, where once you put it into the vehicle in the LCFS program, you get that divisor based on the efficiency of your vehicle. So you can never get below zero really with electricity. That's kind of why it sort of tops out at the 0 point. Solar, is considered zero. There are some line losses associated with that. Wind is the same way. Hydro, same way. That's just the way that the numbers sort of play out in the EER spectrum for power. But it does vary seasonally, right? And it does vary from 1 hour to the next during the course of the day. And while I didn't share the chart, I just pulled one together a short time ago that shows quarter by quarter, hour by hour, what this CI score, how it varies on the electric grid. And you'll see in the second quarter in the spring, just about where we are today, the CI scores in the middle of the day are the best because we've got so much solar. In the third and fourth quarter, late in the day, when they're running, off early evening hours, the CI score is pretty high because they're running off of different resources at that time. So hydrogen can play a role really, I think, in balancing that out for grid power over term.
Great. Thanks for that, Bill. Question, we covered it slightly a bit earlier from Jean, but on the hydrogen blending. So the question we had was from Kevin, what % of hydrogen will the natural gas system pilot ultimately blend? And is that a residential blend only, or does it also include industrial uses for gases? I'm not sure if, Jean, you can probably further elaborate on that one.
Throw a number out there, Jean.
Thank you, Bill. So a few blends were discussed last week in the workshop, everywhere from 10% hydrogen to 20% hydrogen. But that's exactly what we're holding this docket open for, and this public blog of documents is to ask producers, pipeline owners, academicians, users, what's the best for the state? So we're at that point. I will guess by year end this year, we're going to have a better understanding of what that number will be.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that's
Jean.
a tough question for anybody to answer, Brent. I mean, it kind of puts Jean on the spot, right? She probably gets asked that question 10 times a day. How much can we put in there? I mean, industry's looking for anything from 1% to 3% to get started, just to get this thing rolling. But like everyone else, we want to make sure it's safe. Can you get up to 10, 20%? I think you're seeing other parts of the globe that are doing it up to 20, 25%. In Europe, you're seeing 12% in Hawaii. So we think it's doable. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get there.
And we've got a project here. I think it's up to 5% in the Port Saskatchewan area. I'm going to throw my last question out. It's probably for one quick response from each of you. And it's, I guess, as you'd expect, some of those key challenges and opportunities moving forward. And if you really had to, identify, one of those key challenges where we really need to work to overcome in the next year or so to really move forward with the hydrogen economy from your own perspectives, what would you pick as that key challenge we really need to gravitate around? How about Gia? Could you start with that one?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think to me, some of the obvious ones, at least in what California has been faced with in terms of our transportation, is infrastructure. It continues to be the limiting factor in deployment. Also cost reduction. So I think that's happening as what are the ways in which I see the challenge, but the opportunity is how do we, as the state, enable greater private investment for greater adoption, right? So thinking through the lens of the end user, how are we going to get this technology adopted? And I'm specifically thinking through the lens of entry point of transportation, but in other areas too. So I could probably go on, but in the interest of time, who wants to go next?
Okay, I'll build on Gia's point. I'd like to see increased private sector involvement in hydrogen and transportation. And we've already got a tremendous amount of involvement. The station developers pay way more than they're required to provide match funding to the state of California to get a grant. Private sector is starting to build out their own stations. So that trend to have a true competitive market where the levelized costs seem to make sense, that's what I'd like to see. And that's where I see our greatest challenge.
Bill.
Yeah, I think to answer that question from the business perspective is we need to look at other economies to see where they've had success and try to apply it here. And the first step in that is establishing a strategy. We've got some of the world's larger economies, Germany, Britain, South Korea, China, that all have a hydrogen strategy. California is the world's 5th largest economy, and we're on the precipice here of including hydrogen in everything we do. The state needs a strategy and how they're going to approach this. Now, I will say that today, the Senate Pro Tempore set up a select committee on hydrogen to look at it. The California Air Resources Board is about to embark on a once every 3 year carbon reduction program for the state called the Scoping Plan. Within the context of that Scoping Plan, the new CARB chairman has the opportunity to develop a statewide strategy and how we're going to go forward. To me, it's let's put together a plan, let's put a roadmap together, and then we'll have private investment step in alongside of government and move the state forward.
Great, that's great to hear. The great timing, I guess, for today and hearing the news from California. And it's a jurisdiction we'll really want to continue to watch moving forward as we roll out the work on the hydrogen hub in the Metro Edmonton area. So once again, I'd like to thank our panelists today for their participation in the webinar. They certainly brought home some of the key opportunities and challenges associated with becoming a supplier of low carbon hydrogen and related technologies to the California market. So I think we can learn a lot from California's early mover experience as we share in the challenges of making the shift of using clean hydrogen within our own energy systems here. I'd like to thank our partners for their support in putting this event together with their help in promoting it, particularly Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association and the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Hydrogen Hub. We'll be posting a recording of this presentation on our website, and we'll share the link with all of you in the coming days. And as I mentioned, this is the second in a series of webinars on key hydrogen markets. Please be sure to follow Edmonton Global on LinkedIn and Twitter to keep up to date with future webinars that will be organized by ourselves and by the Alberta Industrial Heartland Association on the South Korean and the Chinese hydrogen markets. So once again, thank you for joining us this afternoon and have a great rest of your day. Feel free to stick around for a short video that we've put on about the Edmonton region. Again, thanks everyone.